Hi everyone, this is Jamie and welcome to another episode of the Yogi Within podcast. Okay, on today's episode, um, today I'm going to be talking about you could say some of the deeper elements of yoga practice, and we could say uh, more around the subtle body, so more around the energetic qualities that change and things that happen within the body and the mind as your yoga practice deepens. So I'm going to talk a little bit around intention, spirituality, even maybe in religion, but mostly around what I have observed in myself and other people, more so specifically myself, around what changes within the mind and the body on an energetic level that's not so obvious from the outside, over sort of years of study and practice. And I'll link this to the Ashtanga Yoga system and also what I've really embodied and witnessed in myself through my meditation practices and some of the practices that I do aside from my yoga practice that I'll share with you, and why I think this is also important depending on how deep you want to go down the rabbit hole of yoga and spirituality. I haven't really talked about some of this on this podcast yet, and I think that there's a few reasons why, and I'll share that a little bit later. But, for me, mythology and symbolism, these are very powerful things. The same with mantras and the repetition potentially of positive phrases. There's a lot of power that can be manifested or can be embodied from these types of practices, and it's an important part of spirituality aside from your asana practice, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. But as I've kind of described with most things on this podcast, most of this is related to the intention of things, and what we do in our spiritual practices and our yoga practices, really we are ritualizing some kind of intention towards certain practices that we have. One of the things that is very powerful in relation to this is your imagination. I'll share a few stories around this and some conversations I've had recently with students, but your imagination is an extremely powerful tool. I can't emphasize that enough. It is an amazingly powerful tool if you can learn to use your imagination for positive things. I was talking to a student of mine recently about this, and the conversation was around that her child was kind of being reprimanded, you could say, for daydreaming in school and for not really concentrating on their work. We're talking about quite a small child here, and it's interesting because I think at some level society and work and other things that take us out of that frame of mind kind of starts to kill that a little bit. And I will implore you, if you have children, is to totally cultivate a playful imagination, and it will do you the world of good in your life, especially if you want to endeavor into spiritual practice. I'll explain a little bit about that later. But your imagination is a powerful tool, especially when it comes to embodying yoga practice and some other forms of spiritual practices, especially around meditation. And if you do study other forms of religion or other practices, personally, let's start from the beginning actually. When I first got into spirituality and yoga, I was instantly drawn to Buddhism. That was the main religion and the main meditative practices that I was drawn to. It was not necessarily such a conscious thing. It was something that came about quite naturally when I was living in London, and that was what I was drawn to. I was drawn to the practicality of spirituality from the Buddhist perspective, especially from the Vajrayana perspective of Tantric Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism. And the way it was explained, for me, it made sense. It was very simple to understand. And I felt that meditation was a very practical tool that was very direct. It was very clear to me what it was doing. And I instantly saw the benefits. And probably from listening to this podcast, you'll know that I'm drawn to things that are very direct. I'm drawn to things that, cut straight to the point and have the biggest effect. We're not on this earth for very long. I'm not really interested to waste time. I'm kind of focused on, what can I get the most from? What has the biggest effects and what's the most direct thing? It's one of the reasons I practice Ashtanga yoga, is because it's very direct and it gets to the root, it gets to the point, and it gets there very quickly. I'm quite interested in these types of practices. And the Tibetan Buddhism, the Vajrayana path of Buddhism, for me, the diamond path as it's described, was direct. It was very clear and it was very direct. It made sense to me. I didn't really know back then what kind of path I was going on and where that would lead to. But those practices have really developed over the years and have become more refined, I would say. And my meditation practices and the types of meditation practices I have become more refined and more direct. And over the years, I've learnt that they really coincide very nicely with my asana practice, my Ashtanga practice, my pranayama practice, and my meditation practices from Buddhism and Ashtanga yoga. They gel very well together. They work very well. For me, yoga and Ashtanga yoga is this cleansing. It's always felt like that. There's this kind of deep detox cleanse that's going on through the body as we unlock, what we might see as the physical element of the body when we're stretching and twisting and compressing, and really opening up the central channel of the body when we're doing things like back bends and twists, and we're opening our hips. I've talked about this on many episodes before. It's a very powerful system that does this at a very deep level. And if you study Buddhism and other forms of Eastern esoteric practices, this has been going on for thousands of years, just in different forms, just lots of different variations. It's a way to connect your mind to understand about this energetic quality that you have within you, especially through the central channel of your body. I'll go into more detail on this on the Bandha episode if you want to go and check that out. But this has kind of been my main focus really within my Ashtanga yoga practice, is this understanding of Bandha and understanding the philosophy around unlocking this central channel of the body. Now, a lot of this is very esoteric and a bit, airy-fairy, we could say. It's not something we can physically see. But this is where I come back to the power of your imagination and cultivating the power of your imagination, because using that as a tool to connect with what you can sense and what you can feel in your body is a very powerful thing. And it's not so easy to explain, because it's not necessarily something you can take a picture of. You can't dissect the body and see this, but it's definitely something you can feel and that you can sense. What we have to be careful of, obviously, is being delusional and fabricating something as opposed to something you sense and you feel. And I think that that's something inherently that each of us has to cultivate ourselves, and each of us has to go into that in what we sense as something is true or whether something is false. The mind is a powerful tool. It can conjure up and make up lots of stories that it wants to feel good about, but there's some aspects to this that I feel go beyond that. In my meditation practices and my Ashtanga practice, for example, there are insights that I gain from going into this awareness that you have within the body, and for me it goes beyond the imagination. It goes beyond that to this kind of other realm. It's a little bit hard to describe this, but it becomes something that you sense within you, and it feels very real. It feels very true. And there's things that you learn from going into this space within you, using your imagination, using your breath, using your awareness, that is beyond is beyond the mind in a way. It's almost in an observation role where you are observing yourself internally, and imagery, words, a feeling, a sense, these things are sort of shown to you. Yeah, this is what I've mostly learned from the practices that I've had. It's very often within my Ashtanga practice, and many students share these insights with me from time to time that just come up. Yeah, it's just shown to you. It could be something from your past, it could be something you're unsure of, it could be something, I believe, even from past lives. It could be something from something very deep within you that doesn't really make any sense, but you sense it and you feel it, and it's something that is very concrete and you understand it at a very deep level, but it's not something you can show someone or take a picture of. When we first come to yoga, a lot of these stories, things that we read about, we could just kind of push to the side and, call it nonsense. We could say there's no way of proving this. It's not scientific. It's not something you can really prove. And, a lot of these things do get dismissed in that way, yeah? And I think when we first come to yoga, our mind isn't really ready for these types of things. And you have to build up, in my opinion, to understand these kind of practices and, really what we think of as the subtle body, this energetic quality of the body. When we first come to yoga, we're very much in the material world. We're very much in the physical world. We're very much, understanding and learning our bodies. We're understanding what our hamstrings feel like, our back. And, many of us come to yoga very disconnected from our bodies. So initially, when we first come, this is a whole new world to us, yeah? Yoga, spirituality, breath work, breathing, pranayama. And we start to learn. We start to cultivate a sense of what our body feels like. We start to cultivate a sense of the boundaries and limitations of our body. And we start to make this connection with our breathing. Over years of doing that, it goes deeper. It's kind of like peeling the layers of an onion. Initially we have this outer surface, and over the years the layers just start going back and back and back and back, and then it becomes much less physical, and it becomes more of the connection to something else within us. I'm going to call it the energetic self, but what I mean by that is it goes beyond the physical. You start to connect with these different energies within your body that you sense and you feel, but you can't necessarily describe it in words. Yoga isn't just stretching, yeah? I know it's like that when we start and we are very focused on achieving postures potentially, or we have different types of pain in our back and we just want to feel better. We want to move, we want to breathe, we want to feel better, and we want to connect with ourselves in that way. Over time that changes. Again, it depends on how deep you want to go into this, but over time these practices change, and ultimately what yoga does is it changes you, yeah? We have these preconceptions of ourselves, we have these ideas about ourselves, we have these stories from our past that other people have told us, that we tell ourselves, and we have a very strong identity that's attached to that. A legit yoga practice will break that down, yeah? And for some people that can be a bit scary. If we have a very strong attachment to certain identities that make us feel comfortable or safe, breaking that down can be a little bit scary, which is why, like I said before, you've got to be very courageous to go into yoga at a deep level and spirituality at a deep level, because those things get challenged. Not in a negative way, but from a freeing way, yeah? You kind of liberate yourself from strong identical attachment to certain things, and we start to see ourselves in a different way. And initially in yoga, this comes from changing the way we see ourselves move. It's something I witness in myself, or have witnessed in myself over the years, and I see often in students. We start to see ourselves in a different way, yeah? We start to break down the attachment that we have of what we look like and how we move. when you start learning different movements and you move in a different way, things get unlocked in the body. Energy starts to move where it wasn't moving. Blood and oxygen move where it wasn't moving before. And we physically change our shape. I think this is a very important part of yoga practice. I don't think it necessarily matters how deep you go, although that can affect things. It's more about we change the identity of what we look like and how we move. You know, when we come to yoga, maybe we move a little bit clumsy or heavy, and we have this kind of certain way of moving. As we start to open the body and become more flexible and strong, we start to move in a different way. And that's a sensory thing that you feel. If you've ever seen, wildlife programs, and you watch the way a jaguar or a leopard or something moves through the jungle, it's beautiful. Humans have the same methodology of movement in a way. It's just that we've lost contact with that. When you run and you walk, you become more embodied in what you do, and you start to refine the way you move. And there's a feeling that's associated to that you get from yogic practices. You can find this in other movement practices like dance, gymnastics. I did martial arts, which is almost a different form of choreography, but you start to move in a different way and you start to see yourself in a different way. And I think what's important from a yogic perspective is if you start to think about yourself in a different way and you start imagining yourself in a different way, and the brain, the mind, starts to change. It starts to see yourself in a different way. The reason I'm saying this is important is because most of my non-physical meditative practices are mostly about challenging the perception of who we are, When you close your eyes and you meditate, and especially in some of the tantric meditations and the Tibetan Buddhist meditations that I do, I've been practicing over the years, lots of these meditations are aimed at changing the perception of who you are and how you think and even what you look like. There's certain deities and there's certain visualizations that I'll use in certain meditative practices that are largely about focusing on a certain type of imagery or even perceiving myself in a different way. This is a very powerful tool. And I'm saying this because I've gained so many insights about myself, and I've learned so many different things about myself from challenging the way I view myself. We start to see ourselves in a different way. This can be liberating to another level. I mean, when you start to really think about yourself in a non-physical way, and you start to see yourself in a non-physical way, and you start to understand there's a side to you that you can't really explain in words, or you can't take a picture of, but you can feel it. And your imagination is the tool to bridge that gap. In the beginning, this is very difficult to understand. And it's almost maybe even possible to make a connection with, because we're so consumed with other things in our life. This is why deep spiritual practitioners isolate themselves. They go to certain parts of the world and they shut themselves off from the world, and they go deep into these meditative practices because you need a deep level of concentration to go into this without distraction. When we come to yoga, a lot of us have had a difficult past. We're maybe in lots of pain. Maybe we've had a lot of trauma in our previous life, or maybe even currently we're experiencing that life in our life. And it's very difficult to see ourselves in these esoteric ways because the mind is so consumed with what's going on in the physical realm, whether it's relationships, work stress, the daily practicalities of life, or even old trauma, all of these things kind of block this energy at some level, especially if it's painful and negative energy. If you're angry, bitter, if you're holding on to resentment towards other people, all of these kinds of feelings and emotions block the subtle energy channel, in my opinion. Yeah, if you're consumed with anger and rage and bitterness and jealousy, all of these kind of energetic qualities that we could class as negative, all of this really, in my opinion, blocks the positive love energy that you can get from compassion and love and going into these deeper practices. When you close your eyes and you use your imagination, as you do in these types of meditations, and also your yoga practice, if you're an Ashtanga practice in a Mysore room, things come up often, yeah? And it's designed to do that. It's designed to bring these things from your subconscious to your conscious, to clear them, yeah? It's very difficult to focus on the abundance of love and compassion. It's very difficult to use your imagination to connect, to see yourself in this other way that you learn from, mostly what I've learned from Buddhist meditations. It's very difficult to do that when you're trapped in some kind of pain or trauma pattern. It's very difficult to do that. I'm talking from experience, yeah? Your yoga practice, these other types of practices will clear that, yeah? Over time, with the right practice and the right teacher, these things get cleared, yeah? Old things get brought to your awareness. Pain you've experienced in the past comes up again. Things that you need to let go of, you learn to let go of, yeah? This is the kind of churning that happens within the yoga practice. I've talked about this a lot on other episodes, and it has to happen. It's not always pleasant, it's not necessarily nice or enjoyable, but it's necessary. And I think that really an authentic yoga practice will do that. I think a lot of modern day yoga is trying to paint this picture of, happy smiley faces all the time, and that, we should be in a certain way of being to be a yogi, yeah? That can be true, but as someone else said this to me many years ago, if you sprinkle sugar on shit, it's still shit, yeah? And I'm saying that is because just putting a smiley face on everything and pretending everything is all right is not authentic, and it's not an authentic yoga practice. When you've done that inner work and you've cleared the anger, you've cleared the jealousy, you've cleared the bitterness, you've let go of those negative attachments, you've changed those abusive relationships, you've moved on from negative old patterns because you're moving into a new place, you're transforming, yeah? You're moving into a new phase of your life. The metamorphosis, yeah? This is what happens in a legit yoga practice, in a legit spiritual Buddhist or spiritual practice. These things change, and you have to change with it. You have to let go of these old patterns and these old negative things that you don't need anymore. And potentially, you do enter a place where you genuinely do feel more love. You generally do feel more compassion. You are generally smiling more. Yeah, you start singing to yourself out loud for no reason. You're just smiling generally more often, and at a deeper level, you start connecting with this love energy. When that happens, it's a game changer. When you feel what that feels like, and you understand that it's possible to live your life in more of a love energy, more of the time, and you're in that space more of the time because you're not getting dragged down by toxic, negative energy from other people or just generally. It's a game changer. Yeah, but it takes time to process that stuff, yeah? If you're in that space or you're working through your yoga practice and your meditation practices, understand that, the process of letting go of that stuff is necessary, yeah? Again, I'm talking from experience. It's just part of the process. It's part of imagining ourselves and seeing ourselves in a different way and breaking these old patterns, yeah? I'm saying this because if you just keep pretending everything is all right and you keep sprinkling sugar on shit, it's superficial. It doesn't last, and it won't really work, yeah? You have to kind of go through the fire, you could say. You have to kind of go through the process of deeply letting go of negative thoughts and attachments. It's just part of the process. And most legit spiritual practices are generally about that. Yeah, it's about moving forward in a positive way, but understanding your past and who you are, where you're from, and making peace with that. Yeah, I'm going to say that again, like making peace with your past, making peace with potentially, damaging relationships with people, or, parents, whatever it might be, so that you're able to be more peaceful. And you'll know when you are, because these things won't come up again. In your yoga practice, in your meditation practice, your mind will be clear. You could say this is a goal of yoga in a way. When your mind is clear, it's much easier to focus on the subtle body. When your mind is clear of all these negative attachments and emotions and previous pain attachments and things like that, it's much, much simpler to have a clear mind. You're at peace, yeah? You can sit still in a room and concentrate on this energetic channel down the middle of your body for long periods of time. When you're able to do that for long periods of time, without distraction, without negative feelings and negative emotions, something happens. It's not necessarily so easy for me to describe what happens. It's just something you sense and you feel. Again, a lot of my meditations are around about visualizing myself in a different way, focusing on specific deities, focusing on specific feelings and specific imagery. This has a powerful effect on the mind and the body. Something changes in the body and you start to see yourself in a different way. This is the deeper levels of yogic practices, I would say. And this is some of the deeper levels of the subtle body, where you start to really visualize these things. You visualize your breath. You visualize these channels moving up and down in your body. You visualize the way the breath moves. Certain deities you start to embody. Certain imagery you start to embody at a deep level. And things really start to shift in the way you perceive yourself. To me, this is really the deeper work of spirituality, certain religions, certain meditative practices and yoga practices, where you start to really see yourself in a different way. And again, it's challenging to do that when we're so consumed with the material world, which is again why most, monks and lamas, they really renounce the economics of the material world, because it's a very strong distraction from their practices. I'm not saying we all have to do that. I'm not even saying it's necessary. Some people just want to go deeper. Some practitioners want to go deeper, and they want to really completely commit to that aspect of life. And that is a completely personal choice of how much you want to renounce the material world, for say, and really concentrate on the deeper aspects of potentially Buddhism or yogic practices. For most of us, that's not going to happen, and most of us don't want to do that. Actually, we want to feel better in our body. We want to let go of things that don't serve us anymore, and feel more happiness, feel more joy, feel more kind of peace, and able to make better choices in our life. And our yoga practice definitely does this. Today's talk is a little bit more around the deeper aspects. I'm drawn to this. Yeah, I more or less changed my life to largely focus on this. This was something that I'm very drawn to. I find it fascinating, the power of symbology. I find it fascinating how you can shift the perception of who you are, what you think of yourself, how you look, how you feel, by changing the way your mind sees things. Yeah, and again, this happens not from focusing on the external world. This comes from having a deep concentration to your inner world, you could say, yeah? And again, that's very difficult to do when we're very consumed and caught up in, negative aspects of the material world. There's lots of stories in Hinduism and Buddhism around this cleansing that happens. This kind of churning up of old things, letting go of old things, and really making peace with things that have happened in our life. Yeah, we all have to come to that at some point. Whatever's happened, yeah, whatever kind of relationships we've had, or previous experiences, pardon me, that really hold a negative energy. You have to kind of make peace with that at some point, so you're able to kind of transform and move into a different phase in your life. And this is completely possible for everybody. Yeah, the mind, again, is very powerful, but it can be also very limiting. Yeah, I've said this before. Largely, what I see from practitioners, is people holding themselves back with negative thoughts and negative energy, and potentially, having too many negative attachments in our lives that changes our vibration. Yeah, we all feel that. We all feel that when we're in a lower vibration point of our life. Conflict, drama, negative attachments, things that stop us seeing, more of the love energy in life. Creative flow state, these things happen when we're able to, feel more peace in our life with less conflict. The subtle body, in Buddhism, they call it, aspects of this will be called like pure light. I think that, how can I phrase this? I think the Ashtanga Yoga system is excellent at opening the channels of the body. It's why I mostly still practice it. It's fun learning all of the physical elements of back bending and, I love jumping and flying around. I love the movement aspect of Vinyasa Yoga. It's energizing, it's fun. Again, I'm thinking of this leopard, this jaguar moving like that as a human is fascinating. Yeah, there's something that happens in the body when you're able to move in this way. It changes the way you think, the way you feel. Generally moving the body has a positive effect on the body. Your mind starts to see things clearly. There's so many benefits I've listed on this podcast, probably 1,000 times, so I'm not going to repeat it. But this idea of seeing yourself move differently, I find that fascinating. I love seeing students shift their perspective on themselves and the way they move and the way they see themselves move. I think that's also a fascinating thing, where we see ourselves do something that we thought we would never be able to do. I've experienced this many times in my own yoga practice, and I'm not saying that's a goal. It's just a fascinating thing to observe, because we see change. Yeah, we see change within ourselves, and we see ourselves do something that we wasn't able to do, and that breaks psychological barriers. I think there's so many benefits to that if it's done in a non-competitive way, if it's done in a loving way, where it's interesting, fun, and it's not like a performance or a test or a way of measuring whether we're good enough. I had a conversation with a student about this morning, actually. I'll just segue into that because I think it's important. But we were talking about, yoga not being that, that we're not telling ourselves negative things because we didn't do something that day, or we were stiffer that day, or we wasn't able to complete a posture that day. This is a completely negative energy, being critical of ourselves because we were unable to physically do something. We were, talking with my student this morning, a lot of us, that's drummed into us at school, performing, competing, doing tests, written tests, oral examinations. You're not good enough if you fail. This is all dog shit, yeah. Again, this is another powerful element of yogic and spiritual practices, is dropping all of that. I mean, I've had to give up a lot of practices in my life because of that, and it was largely down to just letting go of competitive aspects of things that really, it can be like a prison. You don't need to prove anything to anyone or yourself that you're good enough if you do or don't do something on a certain day. These are very negative patterns that can affect us in a strong way. You're good enough as you are. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. And when you meet someone with that level of confidence, where they don't need to prove to themselves or you anything that day, that's real confidence. It's something that we have an insight into ourselves where we know we're good as we are. And I think that a legit spiritual practice will help you embody that, where you feel that within yourself and you don't need anyone else to validate that for you. You're just good. You're confident. I'm aware of what I'm capable of, and you don't need to prove anything to anyone. I digress. But this is an important thing to understand, yeah? It's this non-competitive element, yeah? We don't want that in yoga. You don't compete in meditation. You don't, when I think about my Buddhist practices, there's no competition there, yeah? I'm not trying to compete with someone or myself of whether I can visualize that thing that day or not. It's the same with body movement, yeah? It's why I largely enjoy practicing on my own. I go into a completely different world generally when I'm on my own. I'm mostly looking for, these days, just the least distractions as possible. I like to just start and just go into another zone. I try to do that with all of my breathing practices, really. It's using your imagination and going into that embodied state is to me, it's fascinating. It always has been, but the more and longer I practice, it seems to be going more into the subtle elements, the more imaginary, deeper things within me that is a little bit hard to explain on camera and on a podcast. But the insights I get from that and the feeling I get from that, and trying to maintain that love energy, this kind of creative energy that comes from that, is so deep, it's so layered. There's so many aspects to it that are always sort of unfolding, and it's always different, it's always exploratory, and kind of combining that in some days with these fluid movements of vinyasa yoga is fascinating. It's a fascinating thing to explore, and I think the deeper you go and the longer you do it, the subtle channels just start to change. And I really do think the Ashtanga yoga system aids in that. Just the changing of the shapes, the deeper the breath goes, the more connection to bandha, the visualization that comes from having a clearer mind and less distractions is a very powerful thing. And people come at it from different angles. Some people just do this from a meditative perspective. Again, I do lots of practices around specific tantras on specific deities, and these all have a positive effect and change the way you think. I think just you need to find the things that work for you, because so many traditions and cultures focus on this in different ways from the East and the West. Other than my Buddhist study, really esoteric practices from different parts of the world have always fascinated me, and a lot of them have the same goal, really. And they all focus on the same areas of the body, which again is fascinating, but they just come at it from a different way. But the Ashtanga yoga system for bandha and these deeper elements, the deeper channels of the body is legit. It's very good if you can get into that. I'm not sure if every teacher focuses on it as much as I do, but for me, it's a powerful thing. And you think about these different traditions that focus on the different chakras of the systems, and the way that these can be explored in imaginary ways is fascinating. There's so many different meditations I've learned from Buddhism that focus on different parts of the body in this way, to really visualize yourself in a completely different way. A completely different way than what you see yourself physically. Things unraveling, things opening through these meditations, things start to shift from an energetic level that you start to feel on a physical level. Maybe I could share something recently. My mother died maybe it was nearly 2 years ago now. And after that period, I noticed I had a lot of tension in my jaw. I think it was just an involuntary thing, just from a difficult period, difficult emotions, And I would always notice it, like in the last year or two, just generally a bit of tension in the jaw. And I have some practices that I use to shift that. And I've been doing specific meditations lately on specific deities in the Buddhist traditions. And I noticed something shift. It's hard to explain into words exactly what that was, but I started to feel a shift in energy in my body. And I remember one evening, maybe, I think this was maybe a month ago, something like that, I felt this strong feeling around my neck and my jaw. And I knew something was going on that I hadn't felt before. I know my body very well. You know, I've been doing physical yoga for many years. I know when things change, you know. And this was something I hadn't felt before. The sensation was different. Something felt very different. And I felt a muscle in my neck and my jaw just light up on fire. And I was like, my God, what's this? I kind of observed it, let it do its thing. And something shifted. And that tension shifted. And this happened from mostly doing visualization techniques and different types of meditation and seeing myself in a different way. And I'm using this as an example is because things shift in the body, things shift in the mind by doing these practices. Yeah, I don't always understand it, if I'm completely honest with you. And I think if someone tells you they do, they're probably lying. Yeah, it's very complex. Things that happen through breath work, things that happen through yoga, things that happen in a Mysore room affect you at such a deep level. And the mind understands a very small part of that. Yeah, the subconscious mind is a very deep thing. It's something that we've been trying to understand for a long time, but I don't think we really do. The human condition, the complexity of the human organism is so deep. But what I do know is that doing these practices changes you, yeah, in a positive way. Yeah, it might not feel like that in the beginning. You know, in the beginning it might be painful, it might be uncomfortable, and it probably will be uncomfortable, to be honest. But something changes. Yeah, we start to see ourselves in a different way. We start to visualize ourselves in a different way. We breathe different. We move different. You know, in yoga we embody different animals. You know, lots of postures have animal names, and you can kind of use this in a way as a powerful way to imagine yourself in a different way. You know, when we think of different birds or animals, we can embody those things and feel very differently. Yeah, we can use this as a tool to feel different. But these practices change you. And again, in the beginning, it's very, very physical, it's very material. But over the time, this changes. It becomes more energetic. You start to sense things and feel things that you didn't really know before. You start to bring awareness to different parts of your body that you didn't know before. Parts of your back and your hips, the way you breathe. You sense things that you didn't before. It's such a powerful system of movement and breathing if it's used in the right way. And again, I'm going to emphasize that if it's used in the right way. I've said this on previous episodes, I'm not going to go into this, but if you're in some competitive shala that is basically, you know, gymnastics, but competition, you're not going to get any of this, yeah? You're not. You might do, but probably not. It's just going to be another competitive measuring device to prove that you're good enough. And ultimately, this is what we want to let go of in our yoga practices, this competition and, you know, being critical of ourselves that we're good enough, yeah? It's not yoga, it's something else, it's just another competitive sport. Science has explained some of this at some level. You know, there's been lots of different scientific studies on meditation. Buddhist monks and lamas have been studied, what happens to their brain activity and things like that in science. But to be honest, you know, I've also studied this for maybe a couple of decades along with my own, you know, spiritual study. But really, science, I think, can take us away from this, yeah? Because science is largely about proving things. And we have to prove this in a material way. What I have found from going into yoga and meditative practices is that you can't necessarily prove these things, yeah? I think of these as a superpower. Your imagination and the power of your imagination with intention, to me, is like a superpower. It's like a sensory thing that you can't necessarily prove or explain to someone, which is the same reason people can't prove or explain consciousness. It's just too deep, yeah? In our material world, we're obsessed with measuring things and proving things. To me, this misses out on some of the most beautiful things in life. Music, poetry, love, the things that you can't necessarily explain, but they make you feel a certain way. Feelings have been kind of dumbed down and really, not really been given much weight. But to me, these are the beautiful things in life. But they also connect you to these deeper aspects of the human condition that you can't necessarily explain with science and you can't necessarily measure. Things that you can sense when you go into these practices. Deep meditation practitioners have been almost classed as psychonauts. You're going into the super deep layers of your consciousness and subconsciousness. This is it's profound, some of the experiences that people have, but you can't measure it or prove it. So these things get kind of dismissed, especially in the scientific world. There's been yoga teachers that have done books from the science perspective of yoga, which I've never really understood, because there's not much going to happen there in terms of just proving what happens to your cardiovascular system or blood count and things like that, which is all very interesting. But it doesn't really get in touch with the subtle body. And the subtle body, in my opinion, is where the magic happens. When we come to our mat or we sit down in meditation, it's such a fascinating world to explore, going into the subtle body and these different sensations that you get in the body. I don't think I would have continued yoga if it wasn't for this. There's how much stretching and, strength work can you do? It's interesting to do all that, but at some level, that will run its course. The deeper levels of the subtle body, the energetic channels of the body, the mythological stories that are associated to this, the different religious practices that are associated to this, mantras, deity fixations. There's so many things here that are, I would say, deeper and more interesting, that go beyond the body, but we're using the body as a tool to get into those. There's so many layers to this that you can explore as a yoga practitioner that completely change the way you see yourself. And ultimately, I think what happens is we connect to a deeper sense of love. Love to me is this creative energy. We could think about this as almost a sexual energy in certain esoteric texts, but really I feel you're just balancing these energies out, this masculine energy and this feminine energy, that really, a lot of my practice is around, cultivating that connection, is balancing those two energies within us that creates this creative energy and connects us to this love energy. That's mostly what I've learned from, these different types of practices, is finding that balance between those two energies and sensing what that feels like. And the material world, stress, relationships that are, not going so well, work stress, it just takes me away from that, which is why I try and keep my life a little bit simple, because ultimately that feeling I get from my practices, love, connection, good relationships, creativity, we all want that in our life. And, when we start to see that slipping away and negative patterns taking that away from us, I think we get better at learning what those things are, and we start to make better choices. Because really, I want to stay in that space as much as I can, this balancing of these two energies, that love, creativity, that energy you get from doing joyful things, and you're not stuck in these negative patterns. So I think that, again, this happens over time, but in the beginning, it can be a little bit tricky. I think that's probably enough on this. If you're a yoga practitioner, don't be. How can I phrase this? Don't be in a rush with all of this. I think this stuff takes time, and I think actually it should take time. Opening the channels of the body, opening the physical layers of the body does take time. There's no rush. Yeah, take your time with your yoga practice. Let it unfold. Let the body unfold in its natural way. Don't compare yourself to other practitioners. Don't compete with yourself or other practitioners. Let yoga unfold. Let your body unfold. Let these feelings come up naturally. Yeah, explore your body in a safe, fun, holistic way. Don't compete with it. Yeah, if you're an Ashtanga practitioner, put some faith in the system and let the system do its work, and explore it. Yeah, explore your body, explore the asanas, go deeper into breath work, and definitely take up a meditation practice. Now, I don't want to suggest you need to do 1,000 things to go into yoga, but there's a certain thing that happens in your physical yoga practice, but there's also something else that happens in your meditation practices. They're similar, but they're different. Yeah. Ultimately, I think that it's good to have both. How much time and energy you can put into both is, we all have to kind of make those choices. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different. A lot of us have families, busy lives. It's not a pressurized thing. It's just putting it out there as a suggestion. And, some of us just go deeper. Some of us want to explore these things at a deeper level. It's not right or wrong. It's not better or worse. It's just how much time we want to put into these different practices. But I think that ultimately, having a meditation practice, having time for a meditation practice, helps you tune into some of these deeper layers. And again, if you struggle to sit still and be quiet and focus on these types of practices, it's a good sign that, some things have to change first, and that's okay. Yeah, when we come to yoga, the mind's very busy. There's lots going on in our mind, lots of things our subconscious wants to bring up. Let that happen. Let that naturally unfold. Don't be in a rush. And again, this is not linked to asana in a way, yeah? You're not going to be more connected. You're not going to have a deeper connection to your energetic self because you can do certain asanas. It's different for everybody, yeah? I don't believe there's a correlation between advanced asana and what I've been talking about today. I think that it is very different for different practitioners. Some of the most lovely, insightful Buddhist lamas I've met don't do advanced asana, yeah? The asana is an interesting thing to explore, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't qualify the depth of your yoga practices. Yeah, just let things unfold, let things happen naturally, and let the body shift and change, and play with it. Play with exploring your body. Play with seeing yourself differently. I find this personally fascinating. It's fascinating to think that you can shift the way you see yourself and to think of yourself by using your imagination in a positive way. You create positive words. You repeat positive words to yourself. You tell yourself positive things. You create this positive love energy, and then you attract that, yeah? You attract that energy in your life because that's what you're putting out, yeah? When we're stuck in a pain pattern and a trauma pattern, we're putting that out for whether we want to or not. It just happens. We're vibing that way. Our vibration is in that way, and we have to go through that. I had to go through that. I have to go through that pain pattern, shift that pain pattern, so your vibration changes. It's just part of the process of letting go of things that have been hurtful and difficult in our lives, and so that we can shift our vibration into this love energy, where we're more positive. We see things in a positive way. We see life in a positive way. It becomes more opportunities, what can happen, what we can do with our body, where our mind can go, things that make us feel more connected. It's a process, yeah? So what I'm saying is, don't be in a rush. Let things unfold and think about your intention. I might finish with this. Think about your intention with your practice. I have a certain intention with every practice I do, yeah? And it isn't about performing asana that day, yeah? It's about a feeling or a positive intention I want for someone else or for myself in my life that day. It's about cultivating a positive energy. And I think when you do that and you have that connection, your asana practice will be good that day, whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you do Kapitasana well that day or you're stiff that day. It doesn't matter. Yeah, we all have our bad days. We all get a bit fixated on asana and doing things. It's natural, yeah. But what I mean is, your intention has a lot to do with how you feel about something. If your intention with your yoga practice is to cultivate a certain energy, you devote that practice to a certain thing. Your intention is to cultivate a certain vibration in your body that day. That focus, you will have a good yoga practice irrespective of what happens. That's what I'm saying. It's a very powerful thing, your intention and mind and the way you use it. Yeah. It can be for you, it can be for someone else. It can be just to be peaceful. It could be just not to cry that day or have pain. It could be lots of things. It could be for love for someone. It could be for something you want in your life. It can be for lots of different things. Yeah. But when you shift that energy and you start using your imagination to cultivate that energy, you'll start to see your life change. Yeah. Things will shift in quite a strong way, in my opinion, witnessing myself and other people do this, when that becomes the things that you focus on. Yeah, it's important to understand how your life is affected depending on what your attention is focused on. Yeah. So be mindful of your thoughts. Words have power, and be mindful of what you put your energy into and what you focus on. I think I'll leave it there. Ciao.